as we join Cleophas and his companion, maybe his wife, this week on the road to Emmaus. I'd like to make one observation which seems very consistent with all of the Easter stories and may be helpful for us. I'd also like to suggest something that I find in this story about our own sense of our spiritual lives, a kind of a paradox almost. But first, just a recognition that Cleophas, the two disciples, were leaving. Right? Maybe they were going home, but they were leaving Jerusalem, they were leaving the 12, they were leaving the church, they were leaving this gathering of people that had become the followers of Jesus. And they're not the only two that'll do this. We also pointed out with great clarity, John does, that Thomas had been gone when Jesus appeared. We find Peter going with just a few of the apostles fishing, like they've left, they've given up, they don't know what to do. And they're not doing it together, which is the exact opposite of what we find happening in Pentecost, that the Holy Spirit gathers together the church. First, the 12, those who are with him in the upper room, and then 500 more who were baptized. And as this church grows, they're gathered into a church, into a community of believers by the Holy Spirit who comes down upon them, gathered in prayer. And I think that might be important for us as we work through these Easter days, as we seek the growth of our Easter season. I think it will have something to do with the Holy Spirit poured out upon us that we'll celebrate in a special way at Pentecost, but we experience each day as we gather together with a community in prayer. But I also think that this will have something to do with us gathering, with how we're church together, with overcoming the temptation to go off, to leave, to be on our own, to do our thing, but to find how together. And that's how together in the Sunday Eucharist and the breaking of bread, but it's also how together in family, among friends, how we gather. Because it's in the gathering, in the community, that all of the Easter growth happens. But having said that, there's also a beautiful paradox. So often I encounter people who are worried about their relationship with God, who lament a former time of more sentiment, of more connection, who are very much disturbed and distressed by doubt, by questioning, by anger that has worked its way into their relationship with God. And they're afraid they will confess or confide that they are afraid that they've lost their relationship with God. But I found that, as we also see on the road to Emmaus, the opposite is almost always true, right? The young woman who no longer feels or experiences a close relationship with God, who struggles to remember to spend time in prayer, who is upset because of certain things that have happened in life and is upset also with God, whose biggest fear, anxiety, is that she might be losing her faith in God. From her perspective, like a very bad place, a lack of relationship. But I can only imagine where God, hearing this, listening to her, seeing his daughter whom he loves, who cares enough to have a relationship with him, who debates with him, who is upset with him, to see a daughter whose biggest fear is that she might be losing a relationship and a faith with him, someone who makes the effort and struggles to build time for relationship and prayer, somebody who desires nothing more than the emotional connections of another point in her life. If you ask God, I think he would say there's a lot of relationship there. And this couple on the road, these disciples on the road to Emmaus, doubting, devastated, in pain, having experienced this weekend of maybe on the edges of the crowds as they call for the death of Jesus. Like this time of anxiety, the shock, and now this almost despair as they walk along. And they don't recognize Jesus who walks with them. They don't recognize him. And that's not because he's not there. And it's not because they're not talking with him. And it's not because their hearts aren't burning. And it's not, they just are prevented from seeing him by the circumstances of their lives. And yet they were closer then on that walk than at any other point. And as they come to the house and as they recognize him in the breaking of the bread, in this same paradox, he disappears. That sometimes our God is closest to us when we least feel that closeness. And sometimes in our need, in our struggle, in our anger, in our arguments, sometimes in our fear of losing a relationship, and in the hard work it is to find a moment, to find time, that in all of that we actually have a beautiful and powerful relationship with God. And maybe it's when we too easily get in the car in the morning and go to work and never think of him. The times when we get very preoccupied with other things, with our investments, with our hopes, with our future, with our plans, with our purchases. Like maybe it's in those moments that we should maybe be a little concerned, but we rarely are. The moments when we think we found him, we should be nervous. But they find him, right? They walk with him. Their hearts burn. And eventually they recognize that. And from where we started, they go back. They go back to Jerusalem. They refocus themselves with the 12 in the community, among the believers, as church. The Holy Spirit comes upon them as church.